What does the future hold for sample surveys? In the assigned reading, Robert Groves looks to the future by looking to the past. He summarizes 3 eras of survey research as this field kind of came into being, and uses these eras to point toward what might be coming yet in the future. The first era was the era of invention. From 1930 to 1960s, the sample survey field really came into being. Now, as a backdrop, this was during the Great Depression. There was a huge amount of need for data on the economy and how people were doing financially. There were data sets, for example, like the National Agricultural Statistics Service, that got started to summarize things about economic production, like this present-day webpage showing you about their survey telling evidence about milk production in the United States. At this era time, the sampling frame was just beginning to be a thing. So the sampling frame was often pieces of land. This could be like towns that could be sampled, where an enumerator would go walk around and talk to people. Or it could be agricultural plots, where you'd see how much wheat was growing on that plot. The mode of data collection was face-to-face interviews, with an interviewer actually going and talking to people. The cost of those was high, because you had to send people out there. Yet the response rate was really great. The population was just beginning to see that sample surveys could be a thing, and when a real person walks up to you and says, "You've been included in a survey, would you answer a few questions?" that was novel, and people answered. From 1960 to 1990, we entered the era of expansion. This was an era marked by a change in technology: telephones. Telephones changed survey research in several ways. They changed the sampling frame, because now you might begin by randomly dialing a number, and then you would get a random person in the population. Telephones changed the mode of data collection. Instead of sending an enumerator out to talk with people, you could actually just call them. This was much cheaper. The costs of surveys fell dramatically during this period. But alongside those falling costs, we began to see falling response rates. People began to learn that when the phone rings, you can talk to the survey person for a little bit, and when you get tired, you can hang up. You might hang up before they even begin any of the questions. From 1990 to the present, we entered the third era of survey research. In this era, technology continued to shape the direction of the field. Technology brought challenges, and technology brought opportunities. One of the challenges was answering machines. As people began to have telephones regularly in their homes, and they began to have answering machines, people learned to screen their calls. And when that happened, response rates to surveys really dropped substantially because people could listen to the answering machine and see that this was the Census Bureau and choose to never pick up at all. Things became even harder with cell phones, which were not always included in the sampling frames of digits to be dialed for landlines. It also became unclear whether someone might be double counted, like if they had a landline and a cell phone. As caller ID became common, this was an additional challenge for response rates. So overall, this was a period when response rates for surveys really plummeted. Now, on the other hand, technology brought opportunities. We live in a world today with tons of digital trace data. This is things like your Google search history and what you've browsed on Amazon. And these forms of data, they exist out there. They cover a massive number of people, and they're basically free. They may be in the hands of companies, but they're the data sets that we just produce by the process of using our computers. Technology also brought opportunities with internet panels. These are data sources like YouGov, where people sign up as volunteers to participate in online studies. And these panels may have a good representation of people across racial categories or educational categories or age categories, but they are not sampled by probability sampling strategies. They're all volunteers who are willing to give their data online. So 1990 to the present is characterized by a couple sources of data. And broadly, Groves refers to these as designed data and organic data. And they correspond roughly to the examples I was just giving on the previous slide. So when we think of designed data, we might think of the census age distribution. This is a data set that's really curated by scientists who decided how they were going to ask the questions and who they were going to sample for inclusion in the survey. When we think of organic data, we might think of other forms like web histories. When we compare these two forms of data, we see that design data has a high cost. That involves a lot of administrative work. Organic data is almost free. Design data is becoming more scarce today because it's becoming harder to get people to respond to surveys, and their costs are always increasing for these reasons. Organic data is becoming abundant. There are tons of web histories, and as we convert more and more of our life into a digital sphere, there's just more and more of this kind of data. Design data clearly speaks to a population. You know what the population is and how you sampled people from that population, or perhaps spoke to the whole population. Organic data is much more iffy when it comes to population claims. You often have a sample of people who were not chosen for inclusion, but they just volunteered their data online in some format. So when we think about the future of these two sources of data, you might think about different futures. For design data, you might think about new forms of designing surveys. You might think about ways we could sample people more efficiently and contact them at lower cost. You might think about what we could do to incentivize people to participate so that response rates would not continue to fall. Now, when you think about organic data, you might think about a different future. This might seem like the future of computational social science, where we go scrape data off the web or partner with companies and governments to use their data. Perhaps in the future of organic data, we don't try to make claims about a population. We just summarize the data that we have. Groves argues that each of these futures is on its own somewhat incomplete. With the organic data, it would be great if we could say something about the whole population. With the design data, it would be great if we could supplement that data with some of this massive amount of organic data that's available out there in the world. Each of these forms of data is powerful on its own, but what might be the case is that the future is together. As one example of how these forms of data could be brought together, imagine you had web histories that also included the age of the people searching on the web. It might be the case that your web histories overrepresent younger people, like the 18-year-olds might be on the web all the time, whereas hardly any 80-year-olds are there on the web. But if you had their ages, and you also had the census age distribution, you could reweight those ages to represent the population distribution of ages. You could take your web histories, and you could make them speak more clearly to a population. The key to doing that would be for design data and organic data to work together. You have to have that design data to know what the age distribution is. And you have to think about collecting your organic data in a way that has the relevant variables in the design data. This is just one possibility. There are many future avenues for research that bring together design data and organic data. And those are all exciting for the possible future of survey research.